The hum of the deep space monitoring station filled the room with a low, familiar drone. Lieutenant Commander David Marshall sat slouched at his console, rubbing the bridge of his nose. The quiet shift was a blessing out here at the farthest edge of the galaxy. But then, just as the clock ticked closer to the end of his watch, a soft beep echoed through the command center, an incoming message from an unknown source. David straightened in his chair, all traces of exhaustion vanishing. His fingers flew across the console, patching through the transmission. The screen flickered to life, and a faint hologram formed. An alien face, aged and weary, with deep-set eyes that hinted at countless years of wisdom and struggle. "I am Zarin of the Selenon people," the alien rasped, his voice brittle like old parchment. "My time is running out, human." David's heart quickened. Interstellar transmissions from distant species were rare, but there was an even deeper unease in Zarin's tone. "You need help?" David asked, leaning forward, his hand already hovering over the emergency alert system. Zarin shook his head slowly. "Not for me. I come with a final request. Responsibility." David felt a chill creep down his spine. "What kind of responsibility?" The alien paused, then his gaze locked onto David's. "I entrust my two companions to you. They are my wives, Nara and Vela. They are strong, intelligent, but they will need guidance and protection." David's eyes widened. Wives. He could feel the weight of the word sinking in, confusion mixing with disbelief. "Why me?" Zarin's voice cracked with emotion, though he tried to maintain composure. "Because, human, your kind cares for those under its wing. You offer refuge even when none is asked. You are the one I trust." David's mind raced, trying to process what was happening. "But surely there are others. People from your own species." Zarin's head shook weakly. "Not in time. They're en route to your station as we speak. They carry with them knowledge, but they are also vulnerable now, without me." A silence followed, one filled with heavy meaning. Before David could ask anything further, the hologram flickered. Zarin's face softened, as if the simple act of making this request had given him some peace. "Thank you, human. You are their guardian now." And with that, the transmission cut off, leaving David sitting in stunned silence. The weight of what had just happened settled over him like a heavy cloak. He was now responsible for two beings from a far-flung corner of the galaxy, two strangers with alien customs, technology, and emotions. As the silence in the command center deepened, David muttered under his breath, "What the hell did I just get myself into?" But there was no time to dwell on it. A message pinged on his console, a confirmation that the alien transport carrying Nara and Vela would arrive in 2 hours. David pushed himself up from the chair, adrenaline kicking in. He needed to prepare and fast. He glanced at the console one last time, as if hoping Zarin might reappear to offer more clarity. But all he saw was the reflection of his own face, an expression of worry, curiosity, and something else he couldn't quite place. Responsibility. With a sigh, David turned and made his way toward the docking bay. His quiet shift was over, and his life was about to change forever. The docking bay was a cavernous space, humming with the sounds of machinery and the distant chatter of engineers wrapping up their shifts. David stood near the airlock, shifting from foot to foot, nerves knotting in his stomach. 2 hours had flown by, and the alien transport was now minutes away. Commander Sarah Reyes, head of station security, approached him with a raised brow. "So, you're telling me you volunteered to take on 2 alien wives?" she said, half teasing, half concerned. "Trust me, it wasn't exactly voluntary," David replied, running a hand through his hair. "Just happened to be the one Zarin called." He made it sound like they'd have nowhere else to go. Reyes gave him a skeptical look but didn't push further. Instead, she folded her arms, keeping her gaze fixed on the docking entrance. "Well, let's hope they don't bring more trouble than they solve." Before David could respond, a loud hiss filled the air, and the heavy outer doors began to slide open. A sleek silver transport glided into the bay, its surface shimmering like liquid metal under the bay lights. As it came to a smooth stop, the hiss of depressurization echoed through the chamber. David adjusted his uniform, trying to steady his nerves. He could sense that whatever was about to step through that airlock would not only change his life, but might alter the delicate ecosystem of the entire station. The transport doors slid open with a gentle whir, and two figures emerged. The first, Nara, was tall with flowing white hair that cascaded over her shoulders like silk. Her piercing violet eyes scanned the room with an air of authority, as if she was gauging every detail within moments. Her robes shimmered with faint patterns that shifted colors with her every movement, a mark of some unknown alien tradition. Behind her stood Vela, slightly shorter but no less striking. Her silver-blue skin gleamed under the station lights, and her dark hair floated gently as though it existed in a different gravity. There was a serenity in her gaze, but also a guarded caution, like someone who'd seen too much of the galaxy's harshness. David took a step forward, clearing his throat. Nara, Vela, I'm Lieutenant Commander David Marshall. Zarin sent me. We know, Nara said with a voice smooth but firm, cutting him off gently. He spoke of you often. Vela gave a slight nod, her expression calm but unreadable. He trusted you. That's why we are here. For a moment, the three stood in silence, the enormity of the situation settling over them like a dense fog. David wasn't just welcoming two new residents to the station. He was accepting a responsibility that stretched far beyond protocol or duty. Commander Reyes stepped in, breaking the tension. We've prepared quarters for both of you. We can escort you there if you'd like. Nara gave a small nod. Thank you. The journey was tiring. As they began walking through the docking bay, David fell in step with them, trying to make conversation. Zarin said you both have knowledge that could benefit the station. We'd love to hear more about your expertise when you're ready. Our knowledge is varied, Nara replied, her voice measured. Technology, culture, medicine. Our people value broad education. Vela added softly, but first we need time to adjust. It has been a long journey. David nodded, understanding the weight in her words. Of course, take all the time you need. We'll get you settled first. The corridors of the station buzzed with quiet activity as they made their way to the residential quarters. Station crew members occasionally glanced their way, curiosity clear in their expressions, though no one stopped to stare. When they reached the room prepared for Nara and Vela, Reyes entered a security code, and the door slid open to reveal a spacious suite. Soft lighting illuminated the room, and small touches of alien decor, provided from the transport, were scattered about, making the space feel less sterile. This will be your space, David explained, gesturing inside. It's designed to accommodate different environmental needs. If anything feels off, just let me know, and we'll adjust it. Nara stepped inside, glancing around with a subtle nod of approval. It is acceptable, she said, her tone neutral but not unkind. Vela wandered over to a window that offered a view of the station's outer rim, where the vast expanse of space stretched endlessly beyond. She stood quietly, taking it all in. David hesitated for a moment, feeling the urge to say something, anything, that might ease their transition. But words failed him. Instead, he gave a small, awkward smile. I'll leave you both to settle in. Tomorrow, we'll start with introductions to the crew and give you a proper tour. Nara turned to him, a glimmer of gratitude flashing briefly in her eyes. Thank you, David. We appreciate your efforts. Vela didn't say anything, but the slight nod she gave was enough to communicate her acknowledgement. As David turned to leave, a quiet voice stopped him. Zarin believed in your kindness, Vela said softly. We hope he was right. David paused, feeling the weight of those words settle on him. He gave them a reassuring nod before stepping out into the corridor, the door sliding shut behind him. Commander Reyes leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Well, that was smooth," she teased. David rolled his eyes, though he couldn't help but smirk. "It's a lot to take in, for them and for me." "Yeah, no kidding." Reyes gave him a pat on the shoulder. "Good luck, Lieutenant. I have a feeling you'll need it." As David made his way back through the station, the gravity of his new role weighed heavily on his mind. These weren't just two new residents. They were now part of his life, whether he was ready for it or not. And deep down, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next morning, the artificial lights in the station brightened slowly to simulate a sunrise. David stood outside Nara and Vela's quarters, his nerves making his stomach twist in knots. This wasn't just a routine integration. He was responsible for two individuals with entirely different customs, expectations, and experiences. With a sigh, he knocked lightly on the door. It slid open almost immediately, revealing Nara standing tall and composed, wearing the same shimmering robe from the day before. Vela appeared a moment later, her serene expression hinting at curiosity but also restraint. "We're ready," Nara said without ceremony. David forced a small smile. "Great. I thought we'd start by introducing you to some key personnel. It'll help you get a sense of how we operate here." As they walked through the station's main corridors, David pointed out various sections: the command center, the docking bays, and the recreation areas. Both Nara and Vela were attentive, absorbing every detail in silence. Their first stop was the research lab, where Dr. Ethan Cole, the station's lead scientist, waited with a warm grin. "Good to meet you both. I hear you've brought some interesting knowledge with you." Nara tilted her head slightly. "We have studied and worked with advanced biotechnologies and healing arts. Perhaps we could offer insights to your research." Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. I'd love to discuss some of our ongoing projects. Maybe you could help us improve our medical protocols." Nara gave a small nod. "That sounds productive." Meanwhile, Vela wandered over to a nearby console, her fingers brushing the touchscreen with an almost reverent curiosity. She examined the station's bio-database, her dark eyes flickering with intrigue. David cleared his throat. "Vela, are you familiar with medical technology?" Vela glanced back at him, her expression soft but guarded. "Yes, to some extent. But my focus is more on infrastructure, systems that keep everything running." David smiled, impressed. "We'll definitely need to introduce you to Lieutenant Grayson in engineering. He's always looking for ways to improve station security and efficiency." Just then, Ethan chimed in. "Actually, if you're both comfortable, I'd love to show you our botany lab next. We've been working on hybrid plant species, and I have a feeling you might have some ideas for us." David gave an encouraging nod. "You'll love it. Ethan's team has found ways to grow alien crops in zero gravity." Nara and Vela exchanged a glance, as if silently communicating. Then Nara turned back to Ethan. "We would be honored to see your work." As the group made their way through the corridors, David watched Nara and Vela closely. Though they remained composed, he could sense the tension just beneath the surface. This wasn't just a new place for them. It was a new life, far removed from everything they'd known. When they entered the botany lab, Ethan excitedly led them to a section filled with luminescent alien plants. "This one," he said, gesturing to a tall vine with glowing purple tendrils, "is from a system we recently charted. It's bioluminescent, but we haven't figured out if it has medicinal properties yet." Nara leaned closer, examining the plant with a practiced eye. "This is a healing vine," she said confidently. "Its sap can be used to accelerate cellular regeneration, but it must be harvested carefully. The toxins in its leaves are harmful if mixed incorrectly." Ethan blinked, awestruck. "That's amazing. We've had this for months and had no idea." David couldn't help but smile. told you they'd be helpful. Vela, meanwhile, wandered to a panel displaying the environmental controls for the botany section. She tapped a few commands, frowning slightly. Your humidity levels are inconsistent. If you adjust the cycles to match planetary rotation intervals, these plants will thrive better. Ethan stared at her for a moment, then laughed. You just solved a problem that's been bugging us for weeks. David gave Vela an approving nod. See, you're already making a difference. Vela offered a small, almost shy smile. It feels good. As they finished the tour of the labs, Ethan expressed his gratitude. Whenever you're ready, I'd love to work with both of you more closely. It's not every day we get expertise like yours. Nara inclined her head. We will do what we can to assist. David led Nara and Vela out of the lab, feeling a sense of relief. The first interaction had gone smoothly, better than he'd expected. As they walked, he glanced at Nara. How are you feeling about everything so far? Nara's expression remained unreadable. It is different, but manageable. Vela, walking beside them, gave a soft chuckle. Better than expected, she admitted. I thought it would feel more foreign. David smiled. Well, we try to make this place feel like home for everyone. They continued their tour, stopping briefly in the recreation area, where a few crew members were playing a game of zero-gravity ball. Nara and Vela observed quietly, but David noticed a flicker of interest in Vela's gaze. Do you play any games? He asked. Vela shook her head. Not like this, but it looks fun. David grinned. We'll have to teach you sometime. By the time they reached the engineering section, David could tell that both Nara and Vela were beginning to relax. Lieutenant Grayson greeted them with a friendly smile and immediately dove into a conversation with Vela about station systems and potential upgrades. David hung back for a moment, watching them interact. It was strange. Just yesterday, he'd been thrust into this unexpected responsibility. Now, it was starting to feel right. As they wrapped up the day's tour, David escorted Nara and Vela back to their quarters. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask, he said as the door slid open. Nara gave him a brief nod. Thank you, David. Vela smiled softly. Today was a good start. David felt a warmth spread through him. I'm glad. We'll take it one day at a time. As he turned to leave, Vela's voice stopped him once again. Zarin was right about you. David paused, glancing back at her. What do you mean? Vela's smile was small, but genuine. You care. That makes all the difference. David nodded, a sense of quiet resolve settling over him. I'll do my best. And as the door slid shut behind him, David knew this wasn't just about fulfilling a promise to Zarin. This was the beginning of something far greater than he'd ever imagined. The hum of the station's artificial night was quieter than usual as David sat in the mess hall, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee. He had thought the day's tour would help Nara and Vela settle in, but the weight of his new responsibility still loomed heavy. This wasn't just a duty. It was a test, and he wasn't sure if he was ready. His thoughts were interrupted as Nara and Vela entered the room, their presence drawing curious glances from the few crew members lingering around. Nara's regal posture was unshaken, but Vela's subtle curiosity was evident as her gaze wandered across the room, studying the strange mix of human interactions. David waved them over, and they sat down at the table across from him. I thought we could talk, get to know each other better, he began, setting his coffee down. Zarin mentioned that you both have skills, knowledge. But what about you? What do you enjoy? What are your lives like beyond work? Nara's expression was neutral, but there was a flicker of something in her gaze, perhaps a trace of vulnerability. Our lives were structured, she said. Duty, family, responsibility. We had little time for personal pursuits. Vela nodded slowly. But we enjoyed simple things. Stories, music. Zarin was a storyteller, she added, a hint of warmth in her voice. He used to tell tales from far-off worlds to pass the long nights. David smiled softly. We have a lot of those kinds of things here. Maybe I can show you some of our music sometime. Nara inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the gesture, but her expression remained cautious. That would be acceptable. Before David could say more, the mess hall door slid open, and Lieutenant Grayson entered, nodding toward David before making his way to their table. Sorry to interrupt, he said, glancing at Vela. I wanted to follow up on some of the system ideas you mentioned earlier. I did a quick scan, and you were right about those vulnerabilities. If you're up for it, I'd love to dive into some deeper diagnostics with you. Vela's expression brightened, and she leaned forward slightly. I'd like that. David gave her an encouraging nod. Go ahead. I'll catch up with you both later. As Vela left with Grayson, David turned his attention back to Nara. She remained still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but there was an underlying tension about her. You're still not sure about all this, are you? David asked gently. Nara's gaze met his, sharp but not unkind. Your people are different. It is not easy to trust what we do not understand. David leaned back in his chair, considering her words. I get that, and I won't pretend it's easy for us either, but we're trying. I'm trying. For the first time, Nara's expression softened, just slightly. We see that, she admitted. It will take time. David nodded. That's fair. The two sat in silence for a moment, a comfortable stillness settling between them. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. Bridge between their two worlds. Just then, the station's alarm system let out a sharp, jarring tone. David shot to his feet, his heart racing. Nara's eyes narrowed, her body tensing instinctively. Attention all personnel. Commander Reyes's voice crackled over the com system. We have an unidentified vessel approaching. Report to your stations immediately. David glanced at Nara, and she gave a curt nod, already rising from her seat. We'll follow your lead. Together, they sprinted toward the command center, the air thick with tension. As they arrived, Reyes was already at the main console, monitoring the unidentified vessel's approach. It's not one of ours, Reyes said, her tone grim, and it's not responding to hails. David leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the data streaming in. It's holding position just outside our perimeter. No weapons active, but this doesn't feel right. Nara stepped forward, her expression sharp and calculating. It could be a scout, or a diversion. Reyes shot David a look. You trust her judgment on this? David nodded without hesitation. Yes. What do you suggest, Nara? Nara studied the console for a moment, then spoke with quiet authority. Send a decoy signal. Make it appear as if reinforcements are arriving from a nearby system. It may force them to reveal their intentions. Reyes raised a brow, but didn't argue. Worth a shot. As Reyes implemented Nara's suggestion, the tension in the room deepened. They watched the screen, waiting for the vessel to respond. Seconds stretched into minutes, each one heavier than the last. Then, the vessel began to move, slowly at first, then accelerating away from the station at an alarming speed. It's retreating, Reyes muttered, half in disbelief. That actually worked. David let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He turned to Nara, a mixture of gratitude and respect in his gaze. Nice call. Nara gave a small, satisfied nod. We've dealt with similar situations before. As the alarm system deactivated, the command center's atmosphere eased slightly, though the weight of what had just happened lingered. Reyes clapped David on the shoulder. You've got some sharp allies, Lieutenant. Think they'll fit in just fine. David smiled, glancing at Nara. I think so too. As the crew dispersed, David turned to Nara once more. I know this isn't easy for you, any of it, but today proved something. We can make this work. Nara regarded him for a moment, then gave a subtle, approving nod. Yes, we can. David felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't perfect, and there were still challenges ahead, but for the first time, he believed that this strange new partnership might just succeed. As they left the command center together, side by side, David couldn't shake the feeling that the events of the day were only the beginning. The challenges would come, of that, he was certain, but for now, they had earned a small victory. And that was enough. The next morning, David stood outside the engineering bay, waiting for Vela to finish her first systems diagnostic session with Lieutenant Grayson. The lingering tension from the previous day's encounter with the unidentified vessel still weighed on him, but Nara and Vela's calm presence had shifted things. They weren't just passengers, they were proving themselves valuable, step by step. Just as David was lost in thought, the bay doors slid open, and Vela emerged, her silver-blue skin glowing faintly under the station's lights. She looked lighter, somehow, like she'd found a purpose, however small. Grayson followed close behind, grinning. "She's a natural," he said, clapping Vela on the back. "Caught a few bugs in the system we've been chasing for months. If you ask me, we should put her on the payroll." David smiled, glad to hear it. He turned to Vela. "You doing okay?" Vela gave a small nod, her dark hair shimmering as it swayed. "It feels good to contribute. Familiar, even." Before David could respond, Nara approached from down the corridor, her graceful movements catching the attention of passing crew members. "There you are," she said. "I was looking for you." David arched a brow. "Everything all right?" "Yes," Nara replied. "I've spent the morning in the research lab with Dr. Cole. Your scientists are curious. They remind me of our own." David grinned. "I'll take that as a compliment." The three of them stood in comfortable silence for a moment, and David sensed a shift, a small but important step toward trust. They were no longer strangers in a strange place. They were beginning to belong. "Since you've both had a busy morning," David said, "how about we take a break? I thought I'd show you both the observation deck. It has the best view on the station." Vela's expression softened, and even Nara's stern demeanor seemed to ease. "That would be welcome," Nara admitted. As they made their way through the winding corridors, David couldn't help but feel a strange sense of pride. The station was coming alive for Nara and Vela, and in turn, they were becoming part of its rhythm. When they reached the observation deck, David stepped aside, allowing Nara and Vela to take in the view. The expanse of space stretched endlessly before them, stars gleaming like distant promises. The deck was quiet, save for the hum of the station's life support systems and the faint chatter of distant crew members. Vela pressed a hand to the glass, her expression one of quiet wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Nara stood beside her, her violet eyes reflecting the stars. "It reminds me of home," she murmured, almost to herself. David leaned against the railing, giving them space to absorb the moment. "We call it the edge of everything," he said softly. "Out here, you can feel both incredibly small and like anything is possible." Vela glanced over at him, a rare smile playing at the corners of her lips. "That is a very human way of seeing things." David chuckled. "We're a strange species." For a moment, they all stood together in peaceful silence, the weight of their individual pasts blending into the vastness of space beyond. It wasn't a solution to everything, but it was a start, an understanding that didn't need words. After a while, David broke the silence. "I know things won't always be easy. There'll be challenges, more days like yesterday, but I think we can make this work." Nara gave him a sidelong glance, her expression thoughtful. "Trust takes time, David. But you are proving yourself." Vela nodded in agreement. Zarin chose well. David felt a warmth spread through him at their words. This wasn't just about duty or obligation anymore. This was about something deeper. He pushed himself off the railing, clapping his hands together. Come on. Let's grab some food. There's a galley nearby that serves halfway decent coffee, and I might even be able to scrounge up some pastries. Nara raised a brow, the hint of a smile ghosting across her lips. You speak of food often. Is that a human trait as well? David laughed. You have no idea. As they made their way down the corridor, side by side, David couldn't help but feel hopeful. They were finding their way, together. And for the first time since Serene's message arrived, David believed that they just might have a future worth building. The station's routine was beginning to feel familiar to Nara and Vela, but the true test of belonging was still ahead. As David guided them toward the communal recreation lounge that evening, he sensed the unspoken tension. This was a place where crew members came to unwind, to laugh, share stories, and forget the burdens of interstellar life, if only for a while. For Nara and Vela, it could either be a bridge to connection or a reminder of their distance from this world. David gave them both an encouraging glance. It's nothing formal, just a place to relax. You don't have to join in, but it's a good way to meet more of the crew. Vela's gaze wandered around the room, curiosity brightening her expression. Nara, however, remained composed, arms folded. This is different, she murmured, her voice thoughtful. The lounge was filled with casual chatter and friendly competition. Crew members played card games at one table while others huddled over a holographic strategy board. Music drifted from the corner where an engineer plucked a stringed instrument. Lieutenant Grayson waved them over from a low couch. David, come on, join us. We're just about to start a game. David grinned, glancing at Nara and Vela. Care to join? Vela hesitated only for a moment before nodding. What kind of game? Grayson grinned. It's a strategy game. Teams compete to capture territory. I'll warn you, it gets competitive. Vela's lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. I'll play. David chuckled, motioning for Nara to join them, but she shook her head slightly. I will observe for now. Taking a seat beside Vela, David explained the rules, though she seemed to grasp them faster than expected. They played in pairs, David and Vela against Grayson and a medic named Arlen. As the game progressed, Vela's sharp mind became clear. She analyzed every move with precision, her strategies catching even Grayson off guard. Remind me never to play against you, Grayson said with a laugh after Vela made a decisive move, winning the game for their team. It's about understanding patterns. Vela replied, her tone modest but satisfied. Nara, standing off to the side, watched the exchange with quiet amusement. Slowly, she stepped closer to the group, as if the light-hearted atmosphere was drawing her in despite herself. David gestured to the empty spot beside him. Sure you don't want to join the next round? Nara arched a brow, but finally sat down, her posture still dignified, but no longer distant. Very well, teach me. As the evening wore on, the tension that had once hung over them like a heavy cloud began to dissolve. Nara and Vela's laughter, though soft, became more frequent. The crew welcomed them into the game with ease, teasing and cheering without hesitation. At one point, Nara made a sly move that completely upended the game's balance. Grayson groaned, throwing up his hands in mock defeat. Okay, now both of you are officially dangerous. David couldn't help but laugh. I think we just found our new strategy champions. For the first time since their arrival, Nara smiled, the genuine, unguarded expression that softened her usually stern demeanor. Vela, sitting beside her, gave David a glance filled with quiet gratitude. As the games continued, the line between alien and human blurred. In this shared space, it didn't matter where they came from or what burdens they carried. They were simply people, enjoying a fleeting moment of connection. When the evening wound down and the crew began to disperse, Nara and Vela lingered with David for a moment longer. This was enjoyable, Nara admitted, her voice thoughtful. Vela nodded, a serene smile still on her lips. It felt good to be part of something. David leaned back, feeling the weight of the day lift from his shoulders. I think you two fit in better than you realize. Nara glanced at him, her expression softening. Perhaps it is easier than I expected. As they stood to leave, David felt a strange but comforting sense of relief. This wasn't just about fulfilling Zarin's request anymore. Nara and Vela weren't obligations. They were becoming part of the station's family. And for the first time since their arrival, David truly believed that they were home. The following days on the station flowed with a quiet sense of progress. Nara and Vela had settled into their routines, Nara diving into collaborative projects in the research lab, and Vela working closely with the engineering team to enhance station systems. Slowly but surely, they were becoming indispensable to the station's operations. Yet it was more than just work. They were building relationships, weaving themselves into the fabric of station life. But just as it seemed everything was falling into place, a message arrived. The familiar chime of an incoming transmission echoed in the command center, where David sat at his console. He patched it through. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Selenon ambassador, stern and formal. Lieutenant Commander Marshall, I am Telex, emissary of the Selenon Council, the ambassador announced, his tone clipped and cold. We have come to retrieve Nara and Vela. Their place is with their people. David's chest tightened, and for a moment, he could hardly respond. They were entrusted to me, he said carefully, by Zarin before his passing. The ambassador's gaze remained steady. Zarin's wish was noted, but the council has decided. They must return home. David's thoughts raced. He knew that legally, he had no grounds to refuse, but sending them back to a life they had left behind, felt wrong. They were no longer just Selenon refugees. They had become part of the station, part of his life. With all due respect, David said, keeping his voice calm but firm, this is their decision. If they want to stay, I'm not going to force them to leave. The ambassador's expression hardened. You have no authority to deny our request. David met his gaze evenly. Maybe not, but I'll let them decide. David found Nara and Vela in the observation deck, gazing out at the stars. The weight of the conversation he was about to have made his heart heavy, but there was no way around it. He cleared his throat, and they turned to him. I just received a message from the Selenon Council, he said, carefully choosing his words. They want you to return home. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Nara's expression remained composed, but David could see the flicker of conflict in her eyes. Vela, standing beside her, looked down at her hands, her calm demeanor faltering for the first time. They are our people, Nara murmured, more to herself than to David. We have responsibilities. David stepped closer, his gaze steady. You also have a place here. It's not just about duty anymore. It's about where you want to be. Vela's voice was soft, but filled with quiet certainty. We've built something here, something worth staying for. Nara hesitated, her composure cracking just slightly. But leaving means abandoning our people. Staying means we choose a new life. David met her gaze. It's your choice, not theirs, and not mine. For a long moment, Nara stood in silence, weighing the future against the past. Then, slowly, she reached for Vela's hand, intertwining their fingers. We choose to stay, Nara said quietly, but with finality. Vela nodded in agreement. This is where we belong now. The news of their decision spread quickly through the station. Some of the crew were surprised, others not at all. But one thing was clear, Nara and Vela were no longer outsiders. They were part of the community, and their decision to stay cemented that bond. David sent a brief but clear message back to the Selenon emissary. Nara and Vela have chosen to remain. Respectfully, the matter is closed. He expected backlash, but it didn't come. The Selenon Council's silence felt like an unspoken acknowledgement. They knew Zarin's final wish had been fulfilled. The days that followed were some of the most peaceful David had experienced since their arrival. The station thrived under Nara and Vela's contributions. Vela had upgraded the station's core systems, improving efficiency in ways even Grayson hadn't imagined. Nara introduced new medical protocols that saved lives when an unexpected illness swept through the crew. One evening, as the station settled into its quiet night cycle, David found himself back on the observation deck. Nara and Vela stood beside him, the stars casting faint reflections in the glass. "This place feels different now," Vela said softly. "Lighter, like it belongs to us too." David smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. "It does. It always has." Nara glanced at him, a rare warmth in her expression. "Zarin chose well," she said. "He knew we would find a home here." David's chest tightened, but not with sadness, with gratitude. Zarin's gift had been more than just responsibility. It had been an opportunity, a chance to build something unexpected, something good. As they stood together, gazing out at the endless expanse of stars, David knew that the journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, but they would face them together. And for the first time in a long while, David felt ready for whatever the future held. Because here, in the heart of the station, among friends, companions, and unexpected allies, they had found what they were all searching for. They had found home.